Salam, peace be upon you. We have already certified a strict pipeline for public structure. We only speak in differences of phi inside licensed finite windows. We lift only when needed. We cut only as bookkeeping. We excise aliases. We certify a legal domain D. We form A as D phi tilde. We extract finite jets up to a declared ceiling NX with uncertainty lineage. We collapse by invariance, so lift and chart choices cannot matter. We type topology and defects, and we refuse anything that cannot survive these audits. Now we are stitching windows into an atlas and enforcing the translation is lawful. Now listen closely, because part 27 is the moment we stop asking whether a single window is honest and start asking whether the whole stitched picture can exist as one coherent object at all. In part 25, we installed the atlas rule. A single licensed window can give us a local certificate, but a world is what survives overlap agreement across many windows. In part 26, we installed the translation machine. When two windows overlap, their descriptions must be related by lawful bookkeeping transforms, not by new physics. For our phase language, that lawful transform is painfully simple. One lifted phase can differ from another only by a whole number of full turns plus a constant shift. That means, spoken clearly for audio, phi tilde 2 equals phi tilde 1 plus 2 pi times an integer k plus a constant c. 2 pi is one full turn around the circle. K is an integer, like -2, -1, 0, +1, +2. C is just an offset you chose because you needed the reference mark. And the most important miracle is that derivatives erase those offsets. When we take d phi tilde, constants vanish. So the first public object A, which is d phi tilde, survives lawful translation. And if something does not survive translation, it is not public structure. It is bookkeeping. So what is left for part 27? The final check. The check that separates a pile of locally consistent patches from one compiled universe. Because here is a danger that almost everyone misses, even smart people. We can have a situation where window A agrees with window B on their overlap, and window B agrees with window C on their overlap. And yet window A and window C, when you force them to talk to each other, do not agree. That is not a small inconvenience. That is not a detail. That is the signature that we do not have one coherent atlas. We have a patchwork that cannot be glued. Part 27 is the triple overlap closure law. In mathematics, it is often called the co-cycle condition. But we are not going to hide behind the name. We are going to speak it as a simple human test you already understand from life. Imagine three translators at a conference. One translates from English to French. One translates from French to Japanese. One translates from Japanese back to English. Now take one sentence in English, run it through the three translators, and return to English. If you do not get the same meaning back, the translation system is not coherent. It may still work in pairs, but globally it leaks. It produces drift. It makes ghosts. And if we build reality out of such drift, we are not building a shared world. We are building a disagreement machine. Or imagine three maps of the same coastline. The first uses one grid, the second uses a different grid, the third uses a third grid. Each pair overlaps, and the cartographers claim they match. But if you trace a point from map A into map B, then into map C, then back into map A, and you do not return to the same point, the maps do not represent one coastline. Something is wrong, and until it is repaired or typed honestly as an obstruction, we do not get to say, this is the coastline. Or imagine three banks with currency exchange signs, dollars to euros, euros to yen, yen to dollars. If you can start with $100, exchange around the loop, and come back with $102 with no fee, no timing trick, no hidden condition, then the books do not close. The system is inconsistent. It is not one coherent accounting world. In real markets, that inconsistency gets exploited and corrected. In our compiler, we do not exploit it, we diagnose it. We either fix the bookkeeping or we type a real obstruction. But we do not pretend the world is coherent if it cannot close its own overlap bookkeeping. That is why the carry line for part 27 is so severe. A universe that cannot close its overlaps cannot be one universe in the compiler sense. Now we will say the mission plainly, in the language of episode 14. The mission is to enforce global coherence. Overlaps must close on triples, or the atlas is not one compiled object. The core is that if the universe cannot close its overlap bookkeeping, it becomes a failed compilation. Unless the failure is explainable as a typed obstruction, a defect token, inside the language we already certified. Nothing mystical is allowed. Either it is bookkeeping error, or it is an admissible obstruction that we can type, or it is an escape signature that falsifies the sufficiency of this layer. Before we go deeper, we will say our triunity reminder out loud, because we never forget it. Every certified structure has 3 simultaneous readouts that must recompose. Omega is cadence, kappa is texture, nu is drift. We do not treat time, space, or motion as primitives here. Omega, kappa, and nu are just labels for how one differentiated structure can be read. If our atlas cannot close, then none of those readouts can be promoted globally either, because they would be stitched from inconsistent local grammar. Now, let's build the co-cycle law in the simplest audio language possible. We have windows. Each window has a passport. Each window has a certified domain D, where our operators are legal. On each window, we can lift phi to phi tilde locally to do differentiation. On overlaps, we already demanded lawful translation. So, between window 1 and window 2, on their overlap, we have a transition rule. Spoken. Phi tilde in window 2 equals phi tilde in window 1 plus 2 pi times an integer k, 1, 2, plus a constant c, 1, 2. Between window 2 and window 3, phi tilde in window 3 equals phi tilde in window 2 plus 2 pi times integer k, 2, 3, plus constant c, 2, 3. Between window 3 and window 1, phi tilde in window 1 equals phi tilde in window 3 plus 2 pi times integer k, 3, 1, plus constant c, 3, 1. Now we do the round trip. Start in window 1, translate into window 2, then into window 3, then back into window 1. If the translation machine is honest bookkeeping, we must come back to where we started, up to exactly nothing. Not almost, not it depends, not in this special gauge. We must close. So the closure residue after the loop is 2 pi times the sum of k12 plus k23 plus k31 plus the sum of constants c12 plus c23 plus c31. For closure, the integer sum must be 0 and the constant sum must be 0, within declared uncertainty. Spoken as a clean law, the total number of full turns around the triple overlap loop must cancel to 0, and the total constant offset around that loop must cancel to 0. If they do not cancel, then our windows are not gluable into one global object. Now we immediately guard this statement so we do not smuggle forbidden things. This is not about time passing. This is not about the universe evolving. This is not about probability. This is not about meaning. This is a pure bookkeeping closure condition for an atlas. It is the final lie detector for global coherence. And now we install the gates that make it operational. We will speak them as actions, not as bureaucracy. First, the triple overlap check gate. We only run the closure audit when 3 windows genuinely have a common region where all 3 are legal and comparable. That means the triple intersection is non-empty and the passports are compatible for the quantity being compared, and the intersection domain is not contaminated by zones we already excised for aliasing or illegality. If there is no triple overlap, we do not claim closure. We simply say not testable here. Second, the co-cycle closure gate. We take the already audited pairwise transitions from part 26, including their integers and constants, and we compute the round-trip residue. We do not handwave, we compute. We check whether the integer sum is 0 and whether the constant sum is 0 within uncertainty. If it passes, we mark that triple as closed. If it fails, we do not debate. We move to diagnosis. Third, the diagnosis gate. Bookkeeping versus obstruction. This gate is essential because we are not allowed to turn failure into mythology. If closure fails, there are only a few admissible outcomes. One outcome is bookkeeping error. That means we made a mistake in our declared cuts, or we mislabeled an overlap, or we forgot to excise an alias zone, or we violated the domain guard, or we treated two passports as compatible when they were not. In this case, closure failure is not deep. It is an audit failure. The remedy is repair. Fix the bookkeeping, recompute, and re-audit. Another outcome is a true obstruction that is admissible inside the language. In our phase language, obstructions typically appear as defects, places where a global lift cannot exist without excisions. If the round-trip residue corresponds to a typed defect token, then closure does not mean everything is smooth. Closure means the smooth part plus the defect ledger is coherent. In that case, we do not erase the failure. We write it into the atlas as a certified obstruction with a type and a charge, and we only claim global coherence in the correct typed way. And the third outcome is the escape signature. Persistent closure failure with bookkeeping verified and no admissible obstruction classification. That is the falsifier for this part. If that happens, we do not patch it with stories. We mark it as a framework failure at this layer, and we escalate. That is exactly what escape falsifier means in episode 14. A public, licensed invariant structure that cannot be encoded here forces extension or falsifies phi monism. Now we must state the prediction without dynamics, exactly in the episode 14 style. Our prediction is not what will happen tomorrow. Our prediction is a forbiddenness footprint. It says what cannot be certified if this part is true, and what failure signature should appear instead. Here is the prediction, spoken plainly. Closure failures will not float mysteriously across the atlas. They will localize. They will localize either to repairable bookkeeping mistakes or to typed obstructions like defects that can be recorded. Once repaired or typed, closure will become stable under redescription. That means the failure will not survive our invariant stress tests. It will either vanish when we correct bookkeeping, or it will remain only as a stable typed token, not as a drifting contradiction. Now we state the falsifier, just as plainly. A persistent closure failure on a certified triple overlap, after all bookkeeping has been verified, after all domain guards have been satisfied, after cut relocation and lift equivalence collapse attempts have been exhausted, and with no admissible obstruction classification available. That is the signature of a non-gluable world at this layer. Now we perform at least one explicit invariant stress test, because the path demands it, and because without it, we are lying to ourselves. Take three windows that overlap. We already have transition rules. Now we run the stress tests. We do the constant shift test. Shift phi by a constant. Spoken. Phi goes to phi plus c. That should not change any public invariant. What does it change? It changes only the arbitrary offsets c in the lifts, because the lift has a different zero. The derivatives do not change. The integer closure should not change. The closure residue should remain the same within uncertainty. If closure changes under a global constant shift, we have a hidden semantic dependence on absolute phi, which is forbidden. We do the lift shift test. Choose a different lift on one window. That means adding 2 pi times an integer plus a constant to that lift. Again, derivatives remain unchanged, and closure must remain unchanged when properly accounted. If closure depends on which lift we chose, we are measuring our choice, not structure. We do the cut relocation test. Move the cut. Cuts are bookkeeping. If moving a cut changes closure outcomes in a region that is otherwise legal and unchanged, then our supposed defect is not a defect. It is a bookkeeping artifact. Or we have illegal operator use across a discontinuity. Closure must be cut movable when the correct typed obstructions are declared. If it is not, we revoke. We do the window refinement test. Refine one window into two smaller windows, both licensed, and compare how triple closures behave. Refinement should change conditioning and uncertainty, not the certified invariance and not the closure type. If refinement creates a new closure failure without any passport change, without newly discovered aliasing, and without newly typed obstruction, then we have a mismatch that threatens the atlas. These tests are the immune system. They keep Part 27 from becoming a clever story and force it to become a hard rule. Now we will make the idea intuitive across scales, because your instruction is clear. Powerful examples and analogies across scales, but without smuggling dynamics or cosmological history. So we start small, at the human scale. Imagine 3 eyewitnesses to the same scene from 3 corners of a street. Pairwise, each agrees with another about some details in their overlap. The color of the car, the sound, the direction. But when you try to combine all 3 testimonies, you find a cycle that cannot close. Witness 1 says witness 2 was with witness 3, at the same time witness 3 says they were alone. Pairwise, you can smooth it. Globally, it breaks. What does a responsible investigator do? They do not announce reality is paradoxical. They audit. They check whether one witness had a blocked view. They check whether one timestamp is wrong. They check whether the same time was assumed but not certified. That is bookkeeping repair. If repair fails, they do something else. They type an obstruction. They say 2 different events are being conflated, or there were 2 cars, or there is a missing hidden participant. That is defect typing in human language. But they do not pretend they have one coherent story if their triple closure fails. Now scale up to the level of science labs. Imagine 3 instruments measuring the same region. One measures a signal in volts, one measures it in a normalized unit, one measures it as a phase on a circle. Pairwise conversions exist and seem consistent, but around the loop, a constant offset remains that cannot be eliminated. What does this indicate in our language? Either one conversion formula is wrong, or one passport is incompatible, or there is an untyped obstruction in the overlap, like a discontinuity in the measurement chain that requires an excision. Part 27 forces us to stop calling it mystery and start calling it closure failure requiring diagnosis. Now scale down to the microscopic and even abstract. Think about stitching together 3 local coordinate charts on a curved surface. Each chart is fine locally. Pairwise overlaps are fine. But around the loop, you cannot make all 3 coordinate descriptions agree without a twist. That twist is not new physics. It is a topological obstruction. In our language, we would say, the atlas needs a defect token, or the domain must be excised, or the global object is not definable as a single smooth thing. Again, the rule is the same. Either repair bookkeeping or type obstruction. Do not pretend coherence. Now scale up to society and knowledge, still without smuggling meaning as a primitive. Imagine 3 communities describing the same event with different measurement protocols. Community A has one archive. Community B has another archive. Community C has a third archive. Pairwise, each can explain differences, translation issues, missing context, different baselines. But globally, the three cannot be reconciled. Part 27 gives a hard standard. If triple overlap cannot close, there is no single public fact yet. There are fragments. Either we repair the passports and translation rules, or we type the obstruction explicitly as incompatible protocols, or we suspend the global claim. That is not politics. That is the logic of public reality. Now we remind ourselves of the compulsory differentiation toolchain, because every part must speak it somewhere in the story, and because this part sits at the far end of it. Here's the toolchain spoken as one line. Licensed window, then passport with coherence and identifiability, then nmax and uncertainty, then local lift, then cuts if needed, then excisions, then certified domain D, then A equals D phi tilde, then finite jets up to nmax, then invariance collapse, then topology and defects, then invariant basis, then stability and entities, then scape stratification, then escape test, then handoff. PAL 27 lives where atlas and overlap compilation meets escape test. It is the final gate that decides whether the outputs of many windows can be promoted to one compiled object. Now we state the carry again, because it is the sentence that should stay in the listener's bones. A universe that can't close its overlaps can't be one universe. And now we must end in the episode 14 way, with audit artifact and revocation clause, not with poetic closure alone. So here is what we write to the ledger, spoken clearly as the audit artifact for part 27. We record an Atlas Closure audit package. It contains the Atlas registry of windows with their passport identifiers. It contains the list of tested triples and their triple overlap domains. It contains the transition tables for each pair in each tested triple, including the integer k and constant c where applicable, with uncertainty bounds. It contains the computed closure residue for each triple, the integer sum k and the constant sum c total with pass or fail. It contains localization maps showing where in the overlap the residue concentrates if it is not uniform, because localization usually signals cut or alias or domain contamination. It contains the diagnosis outputs, bookkeeping error codes, domain violation codes, cut relocation failures, alias flags, or admissible obstruction typing codes. And it contains the escalation flags for any unexplained persistent closure failure, marked as an escape candidate requiring framework review. Now the revocation clause, spoken as law. If closure fails on any certified triple overlap and cannot be repaired by correcting bookkeeping, and cannot be typed as an admissible obstruction within the language, then global compilation fails for that atlas. All global claims derived from that atlas are suspended and must not be promoted as public invariants. Any statement that pretends the world is coherent here, while triple closure is failing, is revoked as counterfeit public meaning. That is part 27. We do not add dynamics to fix it. We do not add probability to excuse it. We do not add meaning to soothe it. We do not add cosmological stories to cover it. We simply apply the strongest possible public test of wholeness. Go around the loop and see whether you return to where you started, after lawful translation, under invariant stress tests, within licensed domains. If we return, we have earned a world, at least at this layer, a stitched atlas that compiles as one coherent object, with any obstructions honestly typed and cataloged. If we do not return, we do not have a world yet. We have fragments, and the compiler refuses to lie. And one last practical note for the listener who wants to go deeper than this audio story. The formal work is available on Zenodo. Search for the word holophase. Now we carry the final sentence out of this part and into the next. If it's real, it survives translation. And if it's one universe, it closes its overlaps. Always, peace be upon you.